37% of conservative Republicans said that global warming isn't even happening.
There is this growing tension and friction between federal and local government.
And over half of the states in the United States have committed to significant climate action.
We need the United States if we're going to get out of this bind that we are in.
So there is hope that these incremental steps will hold in the new administration.
Maybe the lawyers could be our way out here.
I am confident that Americans will show up at COP30, and it will take all of us working together to get there, but it can happen.
Hello everyone and welcome back. Today we're tackling a critical topic, climate resilience in the face of worsening extreme weather. From devastating hurricanes to an uncertain political landscape, the United States finds itself at a crossroad for its climate future. My guest today is Alice Hill, a former advisor to President Barack Obama and a leading expert on climate risk and resilience. Alice has spent her career shaping policies to protect communities from the growing threats of climate change. Her work has been instrumental in highlighting the importance of preparedness, adaptation, and collaboration across all levels of government. In this episode, we'll explore how the US can maintain progress on climate action, what extreme weather events are teaching us about resilience, and where we can find hope amidst the challenges. Alice, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So Alice, how can the US sustain global leadership in climate policy with the upcoming administration?
Well, it's undoubtedly going to be a tough job. It's anticipated that shortly after the inauguration, we'll withdraw again the United States from the Paris Agreement. And there is even speculation that he may pull out of the UNFCCC process altogether. So he is a climate skeptic, and he is appointing secretaries, administrators who are also climate skeptics. So we have been pushed back on our journey of tackling climate change to questioning even whether it's occurring. Now, we have a playbook that emerged when was first elected in his first term. What we saw was rolling back U.S. commitments internationally was state, local, municipal governments stepping up. They said they were all in, and over half of the states in the United States have committed to significant climate action. We are seeing even more in the wake of second election of states like California and New York doubling down, really committing to making sure that they are going to do everything they can to continue to reduce emissions and focus on adaptation. So we will see across the nation from these local governments as well as from some corporations continued fervor to make progress on climate change. But they will encounter a federal government that is highly resistant. So it's going to be tough terrain, and it would be a lot easier if the federal government was aligned, but that doesn't mean the United States is out. In fact, the United States will be present. I am confident that Americans will show up at COP30 and that they will bring to the table commitments that they can make for progress.
Now, this year, the United States was hit by two devastating hurricanes, Helene and Milton. What lessons can we take from their impact, and what is America doing to build more climate resilient communities in the future? I suspect you alluded a little bit to that in your first question with local government, but could you elaborate a little bit more on this, please?
Well, we are at the beginning of our adaptation journey, in my opinion. We still have way too many examples of poor land use choices that would be people locating in a floodplain or in an area that has burned in the past and will likely burn in the future. And the reason that occurs is because there's a tension in the United States between the federal government's role in being the emergency manager of last resort with the most money, and the local governments who make decisions about where people build and how they build. Those local governments want the tax revenues from the property taxes, so they tend to issue a lot of permits, and those permits are in at-risk areas. So they also don't like to require higher building standards because that usually entails more money for the construction of the building. So there's this tension between the federal government and the state governments. The federal government recently, however, has begun to exercise discipline on local governments, saying you won't be entitled to federal funds if you do not have better practices. We'll see how that plays out, but if that plays out as intended, it could lift building practices, land use choices across the United States. And of course, that is ground zero for adaptation, figuring out where people can safely live and building structures in which they can safely thrive is so important to make sure that the economy hums, people's lives are saved, children get to school in a warming world.
Great words. But as you've already mentioned, you know, there is this growing tension and friction between federal and local government. What needs to be done? What would be the strategy that you would employ in order to get the two to align and work better together?
The strategy is that if a state or corporation or a family wants money from other federal taxpayers to build or rebuild structures, they need to follow requirements as to how to do so. And we did that in the Obama administration. We created, after we had another terrible hurricane, Hurricane Sandy. That hurricane plunged Manhattan, the city that never sleeps, into darkness. And out of the wreckage, it was decided, you know, we really need to require that people who build in floodplains build higher so the floodwaters can wash through. As a result of that, there's federal flood risk management standard created. I led the development of that, by the way. But interestingly, in his first term, 10 days before Hurricane Harvey dumped almost a meter and a half of rain on Houston, which is pancake flat, and massive flooding followed, he pulled that standard, that national standard for building in floodplains. President Biden brought it back, and the hope is now, given the history of flooding that the U.S. has experienced in recent years, including this year, we'll leave that in place because it makes sense for fiscal conservatives. Why should we be pouring taxpayer money into areas that are destined to flood? They're going to be soggy. There's going to be a lot of damage. So there is hope that these incremental steps will hold in the new administration because it really lines up with a philosophy of being conservative when it comes to spending money.
This is an interesting one to me, is with all the impacts that America is having from climate change, the hurricanes, the extreme weather events. Do you think climate change is now playing a part in voter policies or the way people vote? Is it influencing voter priorities and candidate platforms, especially when you think the last election was seen as the election of the podcast? You know, this is where people are getting their information from. Yeah, are they going to be getting the right information? And will it be information, if it is information around climate change, is it going to influence how they vote?
Well, it's a very interesting question. When I first started really devoting my career to climate change back in 2009, I had this belief that once these impacts materialized in a significant way, which they have, we've had flooding, wildfires, heat extremes in the United States, and it just keeps going up. So we are suffering here. I had thought, oh, well, at that moment, that's when people are going to get it, and they're really going to want to have climate action. The polling that we have says that's not so much. According to an analysis by the Yale Program on Climate Change, although 37% of American voters rank preventing extreme weather as among a top reason to address climate change, and that's an increase of up from 28% just 7 years ago. The shift that is occurring is mostly just among Democrats, moderate and right-leaning Democrats. What we're finding is that the opinions of left-leaning Republicans stayed the same. And with conservative Republicans, 37% of conservative Republicans said that global warming isn't even happening. And that's up from 28% just 7 years ago. So we're seeing Republicans digging in on being not enthusiastic about taking any action on climate change. And we also know that from social scientists that one's views are informed by whom you share a room with. And I'll briefly just share this experiment. It's called the smoky room experiment, where students were put in a room with 3 other people. Smoke starts coming underneath the door of the room. The 3 other people who have been informed to do this ignore the smoke, and they tracked what reaction would occur. And if there are 3 people ignoring it, the student typically only in about 10% of the time would raise concern about the smoke. Now, if the student was alone, that student would raise concern about 75% of the time. So we're very influenced by what our peers, our neighbors are doing as to whether we take action. And since in the United States, we tend, almost like tribes, we tend to hang out with our political left or right group, I think that's hurting our ability to make progress on climate change, because we're seeing this growth in denial that it's even happening.
Can we get some positivity into this, Alice? So amid the challenges of 2024, what's one positive climate story that stood out to you?
I think it's the story that's happening in the courts. And I particularly loved the lawsuit by the Swiss old ladies, and I think they would call themselves that too, in the European Court of Human Rights. 2,000 women aged 64 and older sued Switzerland, saying their country hadn't set adequate reduction targets for greenhouse gas emissions, and that as a result, they would be harmed by extreme heat. And they won. And we're seeing that occur here in the United States. We are among the most litigious countries in the world. We've got a lot of lawyers and a lot of courts. We're seeing more and more lawsuits claiming damage, and those lawsuits, many of them are still alive. Now, I am a former judge, so I know that the wheels of justice turn slowly. But this is a positive development because it's putting more pressure on those people who are causing harm, the emitters, to address what has occurred and to help people prepare for the impacts that they're already suffering and the ones that will come in the future.
People power evident there, and really, really important. And I never thought I'd say this or think this, but maybe the lawyers could be our way out here. They could be our saviors. If people start using litigation in order to try and find justice for climate.
Well, in the United States, we have 2 big examples where the lawyers did exactly that. That is in tobacco, holding the tobacco companies liable for the lung disease that's caused by smoking, as well as asbestos. It was lawsuits that stopped the spreading of asbestos without adequate safety measures, because that also causes serious illness. So we'll see, but it's slow. I wouldn't say that can be our only lever here. It is an important lever going forward, however.
Yeah, I totally agree. Look, Alice, before we wrap up, I'd like to end with a quick fire round. I think you know how this works. I'm going to start with a sentence, and I'd love for you to finish it with your thoughts. Are you up for this one, Alice?
Sure, I'll give it a try.
Okay, let's go. A country whose climate actions I admire is.
Well, that is a hard one because so many countries do things that I admire, although the overall picture may not be the most admirable. I'd say for the most admirable overall, I think Denmark gets the vote. It just has taken a multifaceted strategy. It's really upped its commitments to reach net zero by 2045 instead of 2050. And it's the first country to impose a tax on livestock emissions. So I think it's doing some very creative things on an iterative basis that is ratcheting up their commitment to reduce the harm that they cause with their emissions.
I wholeheartedly agree with you there, Alice. I've been to Copenhagen. What a wonderful, wonderful city, and so encouraged by what they're doing to tackle the climate crisis. Okay, next one. The way I stay hopeful about our climate future is.
I work on the issue. And I know that facing the challenge of climate change makes me more energized. It actually gives me joy. That's a surprising word to associate with such a dire threat. But being able to be a part of the solution is the thing that gives me hope and gives me the necessary enthusiasm to continue the fight. And it just came out, another study from Yale, that Americans, and a lot of Americans, are reporting distress over climate change. We know there are significant mental health impacts because of climate change. Their study shows that those who are suffering from distress are more likely to engage in collective climate action or be willing to do so because they recognize that this is a way to help them get over the negative feelings that can accompany the thought of climate change. So to all of my friends, when they express that they want to step back, I so encourage them, find a way to get involved. It will inspire you and give you the hope that we can have the better future that I know that we can have, and the scientists tell us we can have. And it will take all of us working together to get there, but it can happen.
Bravo, Alice. Well said, Alice Hill. Thank you so much. We are so grateful for you sharing those insights. And to everyone watching or listening, let's take Alice's words as a reminder that preparedness starts with each of us, and the time to act is now. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.